All right, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for Lone Star's presentation of Demystifying Price to Win. I'm Ricardo Lopez. I'm a vice president here for Competitive Analytics and Pricing Solutions, and I'll be speaking in part of the presentation today. And join with me is James Rudlinger, our director for our Competitive Analytics and Pricing Services group. And so what we'll talk about today, price to win can be considered a dark art by many, and for us, we just want to dispel some of those rumors and misconceptions by just providing some background information and some framing about what is price to win, how can I use it, and then going through some practical real-world applications, and we'll leave some time for questions at the end. So. All right, one more. Okay, so just a little bit about Lone Star before we get going. We won't read the chart, but we're a small company here based in Addison, Texas, a little over 100 employees and 1,500 1099s. Our primary business is to do predictive and prescriptive decision analysis. And price to win falls within that particular domain. And then as far as our fundamentals of who we are, this is very important because it's going to go into price to win, but we embrace uncertainty. Uncertainty is real. When we're predicting competitor behavior, there are things that, short of committing corporate espionage, that we just don't know. And we have to acknowledge the reality that uncertainty is real. We've got to deal with it. And then the other thing is we believe in transparent solutions. So if you think about a cause and effect based approach, what that means for transparency is if I do A, I can see what happens in B, C, D, E, F, okay? And for price to win, that's something that we really want to be able to capture, right? What if the customer changes a requirement? What if my competition does this? How will they respond? How should I respond? So those fundamentals are just really important to frame the rest of this conversation. Okay, so why price to win? It's a question we get asked a lot in the business that we do. And, when we think about price to win is really a decision analysis tool that encompasses all of the different functions that support the capture process. So you can see that over here on the right. It's not a one-time event. It's a living, breathing analysis, okay, that incorporates changes and competitive intelligence and all of that, so on and so forth. But it's a team sport, right? Every company that's going after this has different, or every stakeholder that's involved in this process can bring different perspectives that provide a really full picture into a price to win. So if we think about what some of the main features are, it incorporates those perspectives in an objective and fact-based analysis, right? One of the real things that we have to deal with in price to win is bias. And this model allows us to adjudicate that bias. We must remain externally focused, okay? We're not focused on us and what we're going to do. We're looking at our customer, our competitors, and understanding how they are likely to respond, how things are likely to play out, and how that impacts our competitive position. We do have to reconcile different perspectives, right? Within your customer community, you might have competing or conflicting objectives and viewpoints about what a best solution would be or what the constraints are. And same thing in your competitor's domain, right? You're trading off different perspectives from, finance and how do we make money, operations, how do we execute profitably, BD, how do we capture this, right? I want to win. Engineering, can I even make this? Contracts, what risk are we signing the company up for? So we're having to account for all of that. Now, as far as the benefits, every minute and every dollar you're spending in your capture process should lead you to one outcome and one outcome only. And that is an increased probability of winning a contract. Okay, there's no such thing as a guarantee here, but the price to win process is designed and has been proven to increase your probability of win. It does inform a focused win strategy, right? I mean, this gives us all of what we need in the context of how the customer will determine a winner it focuses our strategy to optimize within that framework. When we think about what price to win is designed to do, it's designed to enable a winning decision, right? Now, leadership has to make a winning decision, right? Teammates and partners, they have to execute. The internal team has to execute. But this process is designed as a decision analysis tool that should lead to winning. And that includes a no bid, right? This process can help us avoid going after low P win opportunities that might take away funds, IRAD or new business funds, from chasing other higher probability of win opportunities, right? And therefore damaging our portfolio. It helps quantify value. Oftentimes in this process, we find things that are subjective and qualitative. We want to understand what exactly is that feature worth? What exactly is better past performance worth? What exactly is X worth? We can quantify that using this process. The goal here is not price to get close, price to feel good. It is price to win. And a win isn't just the lowest price, it's actually optimizing at the right price. Okay, and if we unpack that statement, it means that we're trying to understand, do we have any discriminators? Do we have things that only belong to us that the customer is willing to pay for or give us a higher score for? Okay, and this helps us avoid the proverbial and the dreaded statement from leadership, how much money did we leave on the table? Well, if we do this right, we're not leaving very much on the table, if anything at all. And so if we move on to the next chart, one of the things that we'd like to do as part of the framing is to discuss, what does the customer think about this? So you heard my side of it. Let's look at the customer words. So we took a few excerpts from different GAO reports that have been done over time, and there's some pretty consistent themes that come out of here. Number one, price matters most of the time. Okay, most of the time, even when it's a best value solicitation, price is levied as a differentiator amongst offerers. Okay, price sells cars. Number two, you see it relies upon the judgment of contracting and program officials. Okay, beauty, in this case value, is in the eye of the beholder. It is determined in a subjective way by the customer. And so we have to be able to account for that, but it's not black and white. There's ambiguity and subjectivity by design. Okay, and you see, sometimes customers are willing to pay a premium, so they'll pay for it, but not much. I'd like those extra features, but I might not be willing to pay a lot. If we look, you continue on through this, right? You can learn about the customer's expectations. So on here it says competition can help reduce prices. Sometimes it could be a tool or a means to an end. And so, if we really think about this, price to win doesn't just matter in helping our probability of win, but it helps us at understanding and navigating through those customer expectations. All right, I'm gonna do one more part of this before I hand it over to my partner James here. And so what you're looking at is back in 2013, JCPenney, they weren't doing so hot, and so they said, let's make a change. They bring in an executive from Apple named Ron Johnson, and his marketing campaign was called Fair and Square Pricing. And so what you're looking at is an advertisement from that era that was trying to communicate to customers, hey, on the left, this is how things, this is how it was before I got here. It's $50, we had coupons, and you got to a $25 price, we made you jump through hoops. But you know what, now that I'm here, we're not doing any of that anymore. We're just everybody pays the same price all the time, every day. This strategy was an epic failure. It made things worse. So let's unpack, the main reasons why. So the first reason, okay, is that JCPenney failed to understand that $25 is not $25. Okay, there was something other than price that altered the buying decision. Okay, so one of the first things that they failed to understand was what their customers valued. Okay, by pricing it this way, I mean, I don't get that feeling of a deal. How do you quantify a feeling? In this case, it's lost revenue. It's not that people are willing to pay $26 for that feeling or $23 for that feeling. They're still willing to pay $25. But if I don't get that feeling, then I'm not going to come and buy there, right? And so I can quantify that in lost revenue. Another thing that was missed here is that each customer has different preferences, requirements, and biases. Okay, some customers, they like to come in and and get that feeling of the deal, like we talked about. Other customers, maybe they felt like JCPenney was lying to them and they really liked this $25 on the right. But when you look at the bottom line and how things played out, it didn't work. So let's look at, if you go to the next, there we go. If we really get down into it, these biases, okay, these preferences and expectations, they lead us to a bias. Well, let's think about what some of the biases are that we see here. On the left, one of the reasons that this technique was so effective is because it created an anchor point, right? I can judge value because you showed me $50 and I paid $25. I can calculate the savings. I can't do that over on the right, okay? I can't do it. There's the value of the story, okay? The value of the story. I get to go tell all of my friends and family, look how good a deal, I got. And at the bottom of my receipt, it prints out this giant number of savings that makes me feel like I got one over on the big company. Even though I know that's not true. I know they're making money. There's something about that feeling that I get. The other thing is, quite frankly, it's not just the anchor, or what I just said. Some of it, the value is just the thrill of the hunt, right? And then the last thing that's missing here is there is no sense of urgency, right? If it's on sale today, I have to go get it. Otherwise, on the right, $25, I mean, I can go get it anytime. And so the real big takeaway from this before we get into the rest of the presentation is when we think about price to win, we have to understand that it's not just the cost and then adding fee and all of that. It's understanding the entire context of what drives a buying decision. So I'm going to hand it over to James to continue the discussion.
Yeah, no, and Ricardo, I really appreciate that. And one of the things I want to highlight too that we've talked about with the JCPenney example is it was an Apple executive that came in and brought this pricing strategy. And then one of the interesting things is that a lot of these JCPenney customers have an iPhone or an Apple product. And so just because their buying behaviors are one way for JCPenney, when they go to an Apple store, they do expect the Apple standard of pricing. And so one of the things that we will recognize in some of the examples is the same customer can have different preferences depending on, right, the type of technology, the store they're looking into, or maybe different brands or preferences. So the market matters even though it's the same customer, and we'll notice some of those differences as we go throughout this. So what is value, right? Just to level set, kind of the classic, if we take like the Jim Belushi of openings, according to Merriam-Webster, value is defined as the worth of something. Well, how we define the worth of something is different to each and every one of us. And that's why we always start with the customer. With price to win, the key thing is understanding what is value to our customer. And we noted some of the price factors. Sometimes it's the currency. Maybe it's the initial purchase price, or maybe it's the life cycle cost, right? Maybe the initial purchase price is low, but what you're going to pay in maintenance over the next 10 years is going to make up more than what that initial purchase price is. And so somebody cares more about the life cycle cost than the initial purchase price. Maybe it's about the spare parts or the cost of training or the warranty that's provided. Or maybe, as we kind of talked about with the JCPenney example, it really doesn't have much to do with price. It has more to do with what we would consider the non-price factors. Maybe there's a brand name or loyalty, right? Maybe I'm willing to pay more for the brand name because I feel that it is a better product. having the certified sticker that it's there, I'm willing to pay more than go to the knockoff or the Kirkland Costco brand. I still want the brand name in my hand at the end of the day. Or maybe it's convenience. Maybe it's, hey, this is the closest place to me, so I go here. Prices may be higher, but the convenience is worth it. So a lot of these factors can take place. It's not just the standard Department of Defense, here's your section M that you get from a request for proposal that tells you your evaluation factors. Sometimes there's a lot of non-price factors that can take place in the commercial world and regular everyday consumers or different demographics that all impact why a person prescribes a value to a product or a service. And then Price to Win is really trying to uncover what is your customer's definition of value, and then how do you fit in against what your competitors are offering to them. So Price to Win is trying to define value. By trying to define value, it's really a model. And so we want to level set what is a model, right? Because same thing, there's a bunch of different ways you can look at a model. So a model, right, in definition, it's a pattern for something that can be copied. It's how something should be done. It's an abstraction that represents something else, right? It's trying to represent reality so that we can understand how things work. Across the bottom, you kind of notice, right, a model can be a representation. The first kind of couple of pictures in the bottom left are identifying different representations of a human being. It could be a replica, right? If we look at the airplane or the ship, this replica shows us, hey, at a smaller scale, here's what this product would look like. It could also be a knowledge framework. And to us, Price to Win is a knowledge framework. It's identifying, if you look at the plane here, it's not just a replica or a representation of the plane, it's showing you how the plane theoretically works and the knowledge behind it to understand what factors are at play. And so a Price to Win model really is a knowledge framework about of competition. And in the bottom right, that's how Lone Star typically sees a competition. We're not going to spend too much time in the first two sections, but Price to Win takes into account more than just, hey, here's a number. There's a lot of factors that go into it, and to create this framework so that you can have a better understanding of a given competition, whether that's in a commercial or a government market that you'd be looking towards. So for the process, for us, what we consider Price to Win is a lot of different factors. Typically, there can be model, modules, tools, or processes. So whether these are subscription service, cost estimating tools, whether it's subject matter experts, they all feed into the process at each point. On the bottom, you see competitive intelligence. We look at competitive intelligence, again, understanding. That doesn't just mean on your competitors, but on your customer. How do they prescribe that value that we just talked about? And we start with the market pricing, which is kind of the business as usual. What would this typically sell for? And then we slowly move into what is the strategic pricing, kind of, right? What am I willing to sell this for because of how important this program or this customer is to me? Am I willing to give them a discount so I don't lose this sale? Is generally the type of thinking that we look at for the strategic pricing section. And really where today we'll kind of focus is on the evaluation factors that drive the Price to Win. And so the evaluation factors are really setting up those non-price versus price factors. How important is price compared to maybe my brand loyalty, right? How important is it for an oil change if I go to the 5-minute oil change down the street, or I feel that I have to go to the dealership every time because there's that brand loyalty and that's where I got the car and I just feel better about that service, so I'm willing to pay the premium. Those evaluation factors help inform where does your price need to be for the oil change example to cause that person to maybe not go back to the dealership? How much savings is it worth to them to give up the brand loyalty and go towards maybe a cheaper alternative? And so all of those factors really go into the Price to Win, and that will inform the win strategy. So for today and kind of our focus, we're not going to teach you how to do cost estimating and look at strategic pricing strategies. Really, we're looking at the biggest part of Price to Win that people consider the black box, or what is the mystified portion, is how do you prescribe the value and how do you understand where that trade-off is? And so for the rest of these examples, we're going to be focusing on kind of, right, demystifying the black box of value and how that informs your customer's perception of value, how you then react to that, and ultimately position yourself for a win strategy or a recommended Price to Win target. So price to win, as we define it, it's the price at which you will likely win a competition based on how all the competitors are evaluated by the buyer, with price and non-price factors taken into consideration. So again, at Lone Star Analysis, we believe in uncertainty, we embrace uncertainty, and if you're looking at price to win, whether you have a tool that can allow you to do high fidelity Monte Carlo analysis, if you're using Excel plugins like Crystal Ball to do some form of uncertainty or Monte Carlo, or even if you're doing just a low, medium, high. Rule number one is you need to account for uncertainty, which is why we even state it's the price at which you will likely win a competition, right? There's always uncertainty in all of the analysis. So this price to win curve that you're looking at, which we also can kind of consider the value curve, is representing a price that the company must bid. And at that particular point, you see indicated there for an 85% probability of win across all price and non-price factors considered. So for us at Lone Star, primarily in the government space, we typically look at an 85% probability of win. And this is pretty much indicating to a client that, hey, at this price, given the non-cost, the non-price factors, and your competitors' prices, this is where you need to be to win 85% of the time. Still understanding there's uncertainty that you're taking into consideration, and we'll see how you can take those into consideration in multiple ways throughout the price to win process. So the first example, again, this is familiar for us at Lone Star, as a majority of our work is within the Department of Defense and US government. We do have some examples from kind of foreign government entities, but the second example will be a commercial market example to show how price to win, which is typically considered kind of a niche market inside of the Department of Defense or government space, can also be applied to commercial customers. But in this example, Department of Defense, it's a government customer, and so that's kind of what we will be walking through here. So value in these type of procurements or competitions is defined by the customer, typically via a request for proposal. Sometimes if it's an OTA or an other transaction authority, or it could be a request for tender if it's a foreign customer, right? Sometimes the name changes, but there's typically a formal document that is a request for proposal that identifies the evaluation factors and their relative importance. So if anyone online today is familiar with this, right, this is where we typically see technical is more important than schedule is equal to past performance, and all non-cost factors when combined are significantly more important than price. Well, the difficulty with that, and as you kind of notice on the right, we try to prescribe a weight to the language. And there is uncertainty because typically the government customer, and especially when you look at the commercial customers or consumers that we'll look at, you typically, whenever you're making a pricing decision or analysis, don't set up and say, okay, brand loyalty is worth 40% of my decision to me, and then price is 20%, and then, previous experience is another 20%. This captures uncertainty within it. So in the background of kind of the tool on the right-hand side, this is what we use internally. There's uncertainty baked around each of these numbers because we understand that we're trying to quantify something that is very subjective, but it still gives us that framework. And again, as a reminder, to us, price to win is a framework that helps us understand the relative importance of these factors. And so on the right, we have competitor one, which, as you notice, there's a low-tech offering under that first logo. They're being evaluated by this government customer on their current capability and future capability, which will give them a technical score. They have schedule as a factor, their past performance, and small business participation, and then eventually their price. At the bottom, you see the total score. Overall, the best value to the customer will equal the highest total score. And then we notice we have them competing against competitor 2 and competitor 3, which have different offerings, which different scores, different value to the customer, and different price points with their solution. So one of the big questions that we have, and this is the big what if question, there's a lot on this chart, so we'll kind of walk through it in pieces. The big question at the top, well, what if there's uncertainty in my customer's perception of value? How does that impact my pricing strategy? That's what we just talked about, right? We're trying to quantify something that is subjective. When they say technical is more important than schedule, how much is that really? Is that 1.4 times if we're trying to make a algebraic equation? Is it 1.6, 1.8? How do we quantify it? So in this example, you see kind of the red boxes highlight 3 different tests that we run. So again, and this is our modeling tool that you're seeing a lot of these outputs in, but you could build this out in an Excel model yourself and say, okay, if technical was 25%, if technical was 16%, if technical was 24%, and test these different factors. And what we were helping identify here in this kind of case study was how different is it if we don't understand our customer's perception of value? What is the real impact? And so depending on that, in the first scenario there on the blue side, walking from left to right, you see that technical is almost the most important factor, but cost down there at the bottom is really 35.7% of the evaluation. So cost is about 65%, and then non-cost is the rest. In this scenario, the client's recommendation is an $11.67 million price to win. As we move over to the right, if we change that perception, and now the non-cost score in that second red column that we've highlighted, non-cost kind of at the bottom middle there has switched to about 35%, and now the cost score is 65% of the evaluation. Now our client can actually charge a premium, and they're able to charge up to $13 million for their solution. And then on the far right end, where we did a 50-50 split, it put the price target at about 12.61 million. And so what we tried to test here is, well, what if the non-cost factors are more important than price? What if price is more important than the non-cost factors? Or what if it's half and half and they're equal? And each of those scenarios, we can see the sensitivity that right now we can look at this as a recommendation, whether we have the certainty or clarity in our capture management process and our business development process. This is where you start to use your competitive intelligence to either A, try to understand which is the most likely scenario and hone in on maybe history tells us that this customer values the non-cost more than cost, so the left-hand scenario is the most likely. Or maybe we don't know, and this is a new start program, it's a new customer to us, and maybe we need to shape this customer because there's no RFP that's out. This type of information creates the framework for you to start unraveling the importance and the impact of uncertainty. And I think the critical thing here is you don't need a perfect answer at this stage to understand the impact of value that your customer is prescribing to the different factors. And so either way, this helps you understand your position and what the best case, either for yourself or for your client, may be inside of this. And so kind of the key takeaway that we saw from here is the higher the weight of costs, the more points available to overcome a non-cost disadvantage. So this required a smaller change in price in order to improve the overall score. So when they had more points available to price, they could actually charge a higher price because price wasn't as sensitive to this customer, and they were looking for more of a trade-off on the value. And so this was an interesting test that we could test the uncertainty. And again, like I said, this is inside of our modeling tool. If you don't have access to this, this is a test that you should still be doing so that you can help your clients or help your internal decision makers understand better the uncertainty of customer value and the importance of understanding customer value inside your pricing strategy. So again, this is another representation of it. These are the value curves that we looked at from price to win. What we're taking away, the green curve at the top, actually shows that if competitor one is offering the low tech solution that we had them at and is priced below the market, so they can actually raise their price. And then when the customer values performance more than the price factor, since they have a lower tech solution, they have to drop their price in order to make up for the gap on the non-cost side. So this is just a different way of looking at the value proposition, and we can actually see how, depending on the customer's preference, it changes where we can price on the value curve. And this helps give us an understanding of that uncertainty and where we need to be for our client. So another what if test in a similar format, instead of changing the weights, so we have the different weights. I don't know if my customer values the non-cost factors more or the cost factor. I don't know which one's more important. So what if I test different offerings? So in the first scenario, we kept referencing a low tech offering. In this case, we said, well, let's keep the customer scenarios the same, where it's either technical is more important, technical is less important, or they're even. But what if I give them a higher technical solution? So you can see now that in the 3 blue boxes, we actually have a higher technical solution prescribed to our client, where their color scores in this scenario on those non-cost factors are higher, giving them a higher price premium. So they have an advantage in all of these cases, but they're actually having to lower their price so they can charge more, 14 million, 13 million, and 13.12 compared to the previous 11 to 12 million dollar range if they have a superior technical solution than we saw in the previous one. So what does this mean for our client? If we've tested different ways the customer can evaluate, and if our client should provide a high-tech, higher-cost solution or a lower-tech, lower-price solution. So we've kind of highlighted a little bit to give a clue in on the answer. That column there is the probability of win at your price point. And so those first 3 scenarios on the left-hand side are low-tech offerings. So if the bidder, who is competitor 1, in this case, we'll call them our client, offers to the customer the low-tech solution, their probability of win in scenario 1 is about a 50% chance nominally, about an 87% chance nominally in the second scenario, and an 81% chance nominally in the third scenario. Even with the higher tech solution, we saw that they had a higher price to win range, but their probability of win is actually lower with what their cost is for that program. And so what we realized looking at this is, yes, the price to win target for our client, competitor 1, was higher if they brought a higher tech approach to the customer, but that higher tech approach for them was more expensive internally, which meant they had a different cost goal to try and get to, and they'd actually lose money or lose margin by offering a higher tech solution. And so the key takeaways that we noticed were, even though the higher tech solution had a higher P win, because of the higher weight of cost, the higher probability of won for competitor 1 was when they were utilizing a lower technical solution approach. For scenario 1, this competitor should consider lowering their price to create the separation in order to increase the probability of win. And then again, this tells us if you can't lower your price, you need to revisit your non-price or non-cost scores in order to see where you can increase the customer value that they're willing to pay the price that you're offering. And again, the key takeaway that was interesting, even though the price to win target is higher, the competitor 1 should not utilize the high-tech approach unless they're willing to significantly reduce their price. The solution is not priced to the value that the customer views across all 3 scenarios. And that's what we can kind of see. If we take that red circle and go straight down, we notice that their probability of win at the higher tech solution, if they can only get down to 15 million, is about a 12%, a 4%, or a less than a 1% chance of win. And this was a really unique insight into recommending to a client that the lower technical solution was actually a better value proposition to their customer, as well as a better value proposition for them internally to have a higher chance of win, a higher return on margin, and meeting a better value for the customer given the competitive landscape. And so this was a unique insight where, just because we even tested, the customer values non-cost items more importantly than price, they should still not offer a high-tech solution. And so that's where testing this uncertainty, understanding the impact of the customer value proposition can help to start to show, hey, price to win doesn't need to be a black box. We can test these scenarios and start to understand what's happening. Why is this changing? What's driving this? Here, it was the customer's value. And then just like the JCPenney example, we may think that the higher tech solution is better for them and we'll go prescribe what they want. But in reality, the model's telling us, no, your customer wants this lower tech solution at a value, so they have a deal. And so this helps us understand and start to break that apart so that we can give a better recommendation to the internal team, or again, maybe to an external client that we're servicing. So that was a Department of Defense example. For those who may not be in the government space, we actually have done a considerable amount of work leveraging price to win inside the commercial space, and this one was pilot training. The big things that we notice with commercial versus government customers, in the government world, there is one customer that I'm pricing towards, right? It's the Air Force, it's this PEO, it's this program management office. there is one customer that gives me one solicitation. In the commercial world, there's multiple customers. There could be hundreds, there could be thousands, all with different biases, all with different demographics. And this is where we feel at Lone Star, we love this, and our tool is kind of built to handle this uncertainty. But a lot of the times this amount of uncertainty is very difficult in the commercial pricing world to capture that many demographics, that many customer biases. And so in this one, I think we had close to about 20 different customer sets for this case study. We limited it down just to kind of focus on some of those key differences. But in this scenario, commercial price to win starts to look at different types of customers who value different things differently. So these could be, in this case for pilot training, we had, maybe it's an individual. You're a wealthy individual, you want to go learn how to fly. You have a different set of biases and preferences when you go to pay for pilot training than a company who's prescribing this for their employees versus a hospital who's maybe training a first responder versus law enforcement or the military or a foreign customer. So each of these customers have a different set of values and different things that they're looking for. So in the commercial world, value is not explicitly stated by the customer. Each customer doesn't show up to the door and say, hey, here's our request for proposal, here's my section M, here's what I care about, and here's the relative importance of our evaluation factors. So if you are a provider of a product or a service inside of the commercial space, this is where marketing and any type of customer feedback loops can be set up to inform how does your clientele and your customer base see value, so that you can do some unique insights and data analytics on what your customer sets are, how they view value differently, so you can do this type of pricing analysis. If you do not have access to that type of information or to your customers, this is where you can leverage subject matter experts or maybe some secondary firms to try and source that type of feedback from your clientele in the commercial space. But you must leverage experience and competitive intelligence in order to determine the value propositions to your target market. And so in this example, you see we looked at law enforcement, the general public, the medical field, as well as corporate clientele. We're all seeking pilot training. So for some of them, there was, hey, is there a full flight plan that can test everything that I need? Do they have live aircraft and simulator training that I'm able to be involved in? What's the quality of the simulators if they have them? What's the flexibility in the training syllabus? So, right, if I have changes in my schedule and I need to move things around, maybe I can't do it this day, it goes to the next one. The location, in this case, to our clients was acceptable or unacceptable, right? For some of them, they can't pay the expenses of traveling and training offsite. So maybe they can come to them and do the training and bring the platform, or however the proximity was, it was you meet it or you don't. Then it was instructor proficiency or recency, primarily based off OEM experience, and then prior OEM experience. And so a lot of this dealt with, right, if I am utilizing a Bell helicopter for this type of training, am I getting the training from Bell, or am I getting the training from some secondary shop down the road that happens to have a Bell helicopter? Or if I bought an Airbus helicopter, right, is this direct from the OEM that I'm getting that training? And so this is similar to if you take your car in for service, do you go to the dealership or do you go to a secondhand mechanic from a secondary shop? And why do you trust those differences? And then those biases are different for different customers. And sometimes, right, for pilot training, going back to the OEM for the training can actually have a break on insurance. So that was a unique one that we had to deal with and look at here. But if you noticed across the board, each of these customer sets valued these different factors differently, as well as when you see at the bottom, how much they prescribed to the non-cost side of things. For law enforcement, about 50% of their decision was based off of cost. For the general public, it was pretty close, but a little bit less. Medical was very heavy on the cost side of things, with only 30% of their decision coming from the non-cost factors. So they had very tight budgets that they were dealing with. So very different than the other customer sets. And then we had a corporate customer who was pretty close, but not as concerned with cost as the general public and law enforcement. So what does this mean for our client in this case study? So our bidder in this example is Flyers Inc. That are providing the service. So what we looked at for Flyers Inc. is what is their price to win at 50%. So if you notice, for a commercial market, winning 85% of a market share isn't as realistic. So what we looked at was, well, for every single one of your customers that comes in, you want a 50-50 chance that they're going to sign up with you compared to all the other competitors, because we understand you're not going to capture 85% of a single given market when there's this many players that are providing this service. And so we chose the 50% target here. And what we see on the modeled TEP, that next far right-hand column, is what their current price today is for their given services. So if their current pricing is about $20,000 for pilot training, they're best suited today for the general public. And if we look at that red column going across the right, they charge $20,000 today. The general public price to win is $20,200. It's right in the ballpark. Their probability of win is about 63, 67%. That's their sweet spot. If the general public is their single largest customer base, the recommendation may be you don't need to change price, right? You already captured the market. This is in line with their value proposition. The general public's willing to pay this. You're good to go. However, if we look at the blue column, if they want to be competitive across all customers, the price to win is telling them that they need to target below their current pricing to be cost competitive. Their $20,000 price, if we look at the medical or corporate field, over on the right, it's saying you have 0.05% chance of winning nominally or a 1% chance. So if you want to be winning customers in the medical and corporate field, you need to get your price point down to about 18,700. And conveniently in this case study, that would hit both the medical and the corporate customers kind of market space. And so this really depends on the client's perspective and what they're looking at. But if they want to branch out to different customer sets and to different demographics, then they can understand that maybe they can look at a price differential of breaking down to the 18,000 and capturing more of the medical and corporate space. And the good thing about that too is, hey, your general public clients are willing to pay $20,000 today. If you give a discount down to medical and corporate and change your pricing model, you can make up the loss on a couple of the sales on the general public because you have the increased number of customers now from the general public, medical, corporate, law enforcement. Across all four segments, you have a price point that's viable and likely to gain market share inside each of them. And so even inside the commercial space, we believe that understanding and testing these what if differences, it really, again, helps to kind of demystify the importance of it. This is what we found a good way to test this uncertainty. And again, you don't need a modeling tool to be able to do this. The focus and what we want to show is test the what if scenarios. That's where price to win comes in, is understanding what if this happens, so that my knowledge framework, when I make a decision on a bid, I'm aware of the impact of those decisions and the sensitivity that they have on the price that I'm going to submit to a government customer or to a commercial customer. And so for us, that really is where price to win can become the black box. We like to look at it as transparent as possible. And this is where either A, if you're doing this internally, or B, you're doing this externally for other clients, you have to build this knowledge framework so that the decision makers understand how changes impact their probability of win. And so for us, that's how you can demystify it, showing the different scenarios. If we tweak the customer value, if they place more importance on price than non-cost, or what if they have a high cost versus a low cost offering, right? Being able to test those different scenarios and quantifying the impact is what we can think can really, again, demystify, right, the price to win process. So what if the color scoring is different? What if my customer value proposition is different? What if I use a different technical approach or a different pricing strategy? What's the risk associated with them and the competitive intelligence that goes into this? Each of those things are testable. And when you can quantify the impact of those changes, we have seen from our experience, it helps decision makers better understand the price to win process and their framework in terms of how they best should position themselves to win. So by testing these, it really does enable winning decisions because it builds the understanding of value. And again, this is value to the end customer and what they're looking for. It helps the decision maker understand the impact of uncertainty. If you're trying to do price to win and use deterministic single point values, it's not going to work. The real world is not guaranteed certainty. And I'm sure we have the joke here at Lone Star that if we could predict the future on these price to wins and not have to use uncertainty and had a magic crystal ball, I'm pretty sure we could retire pretty quickly and then not have to do this anymore. But there's uncertainty in the world we live in, and especially with competitive intelligence, you have to account for the unknown factors and test what impacts those have. So understanding the impact of the uncertainty is just as important instead of disregarding it and going with single point values or disregarding the fact that there is subjectivity in the analysis. And then lastly, right, it provides leadership with courses of action. At the end of the day, decision makers want to understand, if I'm placing a bet on this competition, what risks am I taking? And by doing this what if analysis, you're informing what risks are being taken given a certain scenario, given a specific what if on the customer value, so that at least a decision maker has the information to make the best winning decision for either that business, for that business unit, or maybe it's just for a certain product release into a market. So win strategy should always be based on the evaluation criteria of your customer. And again, maybe it's not a government customer, so evaluation criteria becomes, right, what does my customer value outside of price that's willing to change their perception of value and what they're willing to pay for a product? And this is what helps you understand your competitive advantage. If you can understand what their value proposition is, then you can understand, are they wanting to pay a fair and square price when they walk into an Apple store and everything is priced the same at every Apple store? Or do they want to go to JCPenney and get a deal and bring in their coupons that they got from the mail, their online one, and get up to 70% off on something, right? What's my customer looking for? What gives me the competitive advantage? What's the right strategy to win a given competition? And so the benefits from a price to win that we'll kind of close up on, again, doing a price to win is critical to increasing the probability of win. If internally you don't have the resources, there's always external options. But again, we believe in trying to give our clients the tools to self-serve so that they don't need to pay for an external price to win. It informs a successful focused win strategy. It enables winning decisions, including a no bid. Sometimes saving money on an effort and placing that maybe into a winning effort somewhere else, or saving that IRAD and being able to put that into a higher probability of win business unit is more important than wasting money on a bid, right? We don't want to fall into a sunk cost fallacy of, well, we said we were going to go, so 6 months later, we're still spending money on an opportunity that we're going to lose. Price to win quantifies the value. It helps you understand bidding the right price. And as we saw, sometimes a higher tech solution, right, isn't the best for a price to win. So it optimizes what the solution should be and making sure that you're bidding on the right things and then really avoiding cost. And so with that, I think we have kind of a couple of wrap-up slides after this if we have time, but the slide deck will be made available. But we will check any of the questions that we have coming in, and we certainly thank you for y'all's time today. And we'll kind of read off some of the questions and give some answers. So again, thank y'all for your time. I'm going to read out some of the questions that we have gotten in the chat during this, and then we'll kind of give some answers to y'all from that perspective. So one of the big questions that we had, when it comes to a bid or no bid recommendation, how do you make a strong case to the C-suite or leadership to follow a no bid recommendation when they are dead set on bidding? Do you run into this? Ricardo, do you want to take this?
Oh my goodness, all the time, right? Somebody, to give you an example, we did a bid on a multi-billion-dollar program, and this VP had made a commitment to her company's C-suite that, hey, we're going to go, we have a high P win, we can do this, even though the analysis showed that you had almost a 0% chance of winning. And at that point, one of the things that we do is, look, our job as analysts is to enable a winning decision. Leadership's job is to make a winning decision. And one of the most difficult things that, you know, in making a price to win recommendation is how to communicate it in a way that leadership can understand, right? And so, you know, they've got different constraints and perspectives, but for us, one of the rules of thumb that we have is, do we understand how that leader consumes information, right? Are they a quantitative person and they want to see lots of details? I've had executives like that who they want 200 slides of information and give me every number. Or are they a qualitative person, right? Give me a high level, give me a one slide bottom line up front, tell me why this is good, not good, and they'll pick it apart. But ultimately, it really comes down to separating, the role of enabling the winning decision from making it, and being able to bridge the gap through effective communications. But that comes in all the time, because think about what you're doing. You're challenging somebody's belief system. It's kind of an amplified version of a capture manager who's gone in and said, we've got a high probability of win, give me money to chase this. How many of them want to come back and put their leg between their tails, or their tail between their legs, and say, yeah, sorry, I was wrong, about that. So it's definitely a challenge. And part of what this tool does, or at least the tools that we use in this process of doing the what if scenarios, is it helps people understand what's actually going on. Because once they understand what's going on, they're going to start running scenarios in their head, right? And eventually they're going to come to the conclusion like, oh man, there's just no way this is going to happen. But you can't control whether they get for that. So I hope that was an answer to the question that, was suitable.
Yeah, and the one thing I would add to it from my perspective as well, Ricardo, is I found when we're delivering the analysis, especially to a C-suite or somebody who's sold in or bought into a program and we're recommending a no bid, is quantifying the impact of it. So showing them the data that supports, hey, if you want to win this program, here's the price point you need to be at, and here's where your competitors are, right? And sometimes showing them that price point that's there can help them understand that, are you willing to take a loss on this program? Sometimes it's a loss leader and it makes sense, right? And maybe that's a risk they're willing to take. Or sometimes you go to the non-cost side of things and say, hey, look, here are the non-cost factors, especially from like a Department of Defense procurement, and here's how they're evaluating. You cannot meet the technical scores of the competitors, and show them where those are at. And so because of that disparity, here's where you need to be. And then you can kind of do those what if scenarios. Even if you were to match them, here's where that price point needs to be. And then typically where the conversation follows is kind of, once you walk through how big of a gap there is how much money are you spending on B&P per month up to this bid submittal? Where could you take that and invest that as IRAD to increase your probability of win on other programs, right? And so quantify the value to them instead of the sunk cost fallacy. Instead, focus on what can you save, and then go get a higher probability of win by investing that money. Maybe it's on 2 or 3 other pursuits, right? Or maybe it's on another high priority one. But let's say you can take that $1 million and go spend it somewhere else so that you can get a higher non-cost score and a higher P win on a different program. So I think focusing that framework that, hey, just because you lose here doesn't mean you can't go win somewhere else and have a better chance of success.
And one of the things to go on to that, this is why the price to win process starting as early as possible is strongly recommended, right? Because sometimes what you need is time to be able to impact the change. It doesn't matter how much money you have, right? But it's easier to socialize a no bid or a, hey, here's the work we have to do to be able to get to a winning solution. Sometimes easier to do that before you've gotten too deep.
No, absolutely. And then another question we had was, you mentioned biases, and how would you quantify biases in your price to win? So I think from our standpoint, it depends on where the bias is. So typically customer biases are what influence the price to win the most, unless it's a client bias that we're kind of working with. But typically in example number 1 that we went through, if you look back at this or kind of look at it, that customer bias on what's important to them can very much influence a competition. And so if you look at where can I score points with this customer, you can look at it and say, well, my customer really likes competitor 2. They're buddy-buddy, they've been working together so long. Competitor 2 just hired the former customer from this program office, so they know exactly what they want. So in order to test that bias, we can give them a plus up on their non-cost score and indicate, hey, the customer we know has a preference for this competitor because of their past performance history. They just hired the former program manager from that office. So we know they're going to get a higher color score or a higher non-cost score because, right, people are evaluating them, and it is subjective at the end of the day. So quantitatively, we'll increase that non-cost score for them to see the impact and say, hey, we recognize bias is there. We have to quantify it. So we'll increase their non-cost score to see that. So that's just one example from my perspective of how we handle that from a customer side.
Yeah, and I would say the other thing would be paying attention to history, right? Customers have a tendency, okay? And one of the things we like to say is that people make decisions, not companies or organizations, right? And so what we like to do is go look, not just at the organizational level, but look at what's motivating. So what has the organization done in the past? What are the norms? And then we look at the specific motivators, okay, or biases to the individuals who are going to influence the outcome, whether it's a competitor or a customer, and try to quantify using subject matter expert input. You know, and honestly, this is where a little bit of the art form comes in. Doing some sensitivity analysis, looking at what the possible levers are and how to quantify those levers in a solution. You know, we look at that as well to quantify, but it's a little bit of art form.
Mm-hmm. All right, and with that, I think those are the major questions that we had in the chat. So we appreciate y'all for participating and providing those. Again, kind of as a closing, so some of you may have this service internally, which is great, and hopefully this provided you some ways to improve your capability. We do offer support in all of these areas if you need external support. Outside of just doing external price to wins, what we really believe is important is providing training and self-serve options. So if you're saying, hey, I can't afford an external price to win, perfectly fine. We're not looking to just take business and say, here we go, right? If we will train your staff, we can provide the tools. Our tools are available as a software license. So we believe in equipping you so that you can do this analysis yourself without needing Lone Star, right? We want to be able to build practitioners outside of ourselves that are there. So this will be here in case there's anything there. These are some of our unique software approaches. So if you're interested in trying out some of the tools that we kind of walked through today and some of those outputs of how we test sensitivity and capture uncertainty, you can go to truepredict.com, check those out. You can have a free trial and we'll help you with training and getting them onboarded and showing the use cases internally so that you can self-serve for your price to win process. And so go ahead.
Oh yeah, I was going to say, one of the things that we're going to do for the folks, look, we know you're very busy, and you know, because you've made time to sit through the webinar, if you are interested in a demo, a trial license for TruePredict, we normally give out a 30-day license for the professionals and a 1-week license for the essentials. So because you've taken this webinar, we will give you a 30 or a 90-day license for the professionals, so you can just try it out on an extended basis, talk to some of our analysts, help you figure out how to use it, and a 30-day trial for the essentials version. So again, just mention that you took this webinar and we'll give you an extended trial. And then the second thing is be on the lookout for another webinar that's going to be focused on best practices for competitive intelligence. We appreciate you guys joining.
Thank you all very much. Again, we appreciate your time. We're giving a whole minute back, so we know how important a minute can be in the back-to-back Zoom, Teams, or WebEx meetings. But again, we know taking an hour out of your day is sometimes tough. So we certainly appreciate it. We thank you all for joining us, and hopefully this was beneficial. If y'all have any follow-up questions, our contact information is here. So don't hesitate to shoot a follow-up email or give us a call in case you have questions about, you know, how this can help or anything clarifying or different ways that we can help your organization. So thanks again for the time, and hopefully this helped you understand price to win a little bit better and demystify that process that is typically seen as a black box. Thank you all.